Yeah, gute Woche, freiliche Woche. Um, in the Hayom Yom today, it says that the Shpola Zayda visited the Alter Rebbe, and he told the Alter Rebbe that when he was a child, the Baal Shem Tov put his hand on his heart, and from then on, his heart became warm. And the Rebbe writes in Hayom Yom that the Shpola Zayda was uniquely a fiery individual, full of fire, and even among the students of the Baal Shem Tov, were all the great tzaddikim, all served Hashem with we can imagine their passion for Judaism and their passion for mitzvah. But among them all, the Shpol Zayda was unique because the Baal Shem Tov put his hand on his heart, and from then on, he had this warmth. So the Rebbe says, when we learn from this, that the movement of a tzaddik, and certainly hearing his voice or seeing a movement of the tzaddik, seeing him, hearing his voice has to have an effect on us that lasts forever. Okay. So on that note, I wanted to share with you a few stories. Ready, Rosie? Okay. Hi. There is a message in this week's Torah portion by Yechi about Yaakov's life continuing even after his passing. The title of the Torah portion is Yaakov Lives, yet the Torah's discussion is all about Yaakov's passing, which highlights that the true life of a tzaddik, how do you know the tzaddik's really alive? You know that you could see that the life of the tzaddik specifically after he passes away. Then you know that the tzaddik's life is not limited to his physical body while he is directly trying to achieve his objectives in the world. But after he passes away and the things still continue the way that he wants, that really highlights that the life of the tzaddik is infinite. But in the discussion about the infinity of the tzaddik itself, there's taking things in a peripheral way, there's taking things to heart in a deep way, or in the language of the sixth Torah portion, Vayechi, to be truly alive. So there was a famous tzaddik, a famous chassid, his name was Rashbat, Shmuel Betzalel, who was the mentor of the previous Rebbe, mentor of the Rebbe Rashab, and he once was at a Farbrengen, and I think I shared this a few weeks ago, and he said that someone asked him, he was speaking so brilliantly, someone asked him if he ever made a mistake in his life. He said, yes, I made a mistake. What was my mistake? My mistake was that I didn't properly evaluate my virtues. On the surface, he was saying that he had a lot greater virtues than he knew about, and he would properly evaluate his virtues, then he would have done a lot more. Someone shared this, previous Rebbe shared this with Rebbe Rashab, and Rebbe Rashab said, this is correct. This is a correct way in serving Hashem. You need to properly evaluate who you are. That's the Rashbat said that was his mistake, which is a little bit surprising because there are a few stories about the Rashbats making mistakes. And so what does he mean when he says this was the mistake that he made? So the previous Rebbe said two stories of the Rashbats would seem to indicate a mistake, and let's see how this connects. So a beautiful article by Yitzhak Arad addressing this. When the Rashbats, he had a tremendous challenges in coming closer to Chassidus, as I once shared a series of stories about the Rashbats. And when he finally was going to visit Tzemach Tzedek, he was trained in the ways of Chassidus through a very special chassid. His name was Michal Apotzker. Michal Apotzker, the previous Rebbe said about him that Eliyahu Navi, Elijah the prophet, would do his biddings, and he gave the Tzemach Tzedek a letter to give. He gave him, the Rashbats, a letter to give to Tzemach Tzedek, and he told him, do not look at it. So Rashbats goes to visit Tzemach Tzedek, and he can't hold himself in, and he looks at the letter, even though he was told not to look at the letter. He looked at the letter anyways, and he discovered the letter was blank. It was just a clean piece of paper. Anyways, he travels further, and he arrives in Lubavitch, And it was late at night. There were people that were learning there, and the Rashbatz was tired and cold, and he went to the oven in the synagogue to warm up. And he hears at some point in the evening, he hears a voice screaming out. The voice says, "Who has brought a letter from Michla Potzker?" And Rashbatz hears this, and he says, "I brought a letter." He says, "Oh," he says, I can't believe you're taking you so long. This is not the first time I've made this announcement. Why didn't you announce the first time? This is already three times I've come because the Rebbe is asking for the letter from Michla Potzker." So Rashbatz follows the attendant of the Tzemach Tzedek into the room of Tzemach Tzedek, and the Tzemach Tzedek takes the letter and he rebukes Rashbatz for looking at the letter. So why'd you look at it? You weren't supposed to look at it. That's the story the previous Rebbe shared. And whenever he shared the story, he would cry. He would say, "It appears that someone who wasn't born a chassid needs to have a different kind of refinement, different kind of elevation, because he made this big mistake in his very first encounter with the Tzemach Tzedek." That was a story that he shared. So he did make a mistake. So why is he saying his own mistake was that he didn't properly estimate his virtues? There's another story with the previous Rebbe shared about the Rashbat, which also seems to indicate a big mistake. Among the Hasidim in Kremenchuk, there were Chabad Hasidim and there were Polish Hasidim. And there was one Hasid whose name was Pinchas. And people called him Penina, I guess because he was so zealous and so for the honor of his Rebbe, and not so appreciative when people spoke derogatorily about his path in serving Hashem. So he was very sharp, very intelligent, and he's very wealthy. And when Rashbatz visited Kremenchuk, the previous Rebbe said, when I visited, when Rashbatz visited Kremenchuk, so the Chassidim told him, "Be careful of this guy." So Reb Pinchas, whenever someone would visit the city, it didn't matter if it was a chassid of his Rebbe or someone else's Rebbe, you'd always make a big celebration to welcome this emissary of the tzaddikim. So when Rashbatz came, he did the same thing. He made a celebration. And he made a disparaging remark to the Rashbatz about Chabad Rebbes. He says, "What do you guys have in Russia? By us in Poland and Volin, we had the Baal Shem Tov, we had the Mzitcha Magid. What do you guys have in Lithuania?" So Rashbatz responded, I could tell that you are a city man and not a farmer, not a villager. Because if you were a villager, you would know that although the flax grows in the village by the farmer, but they send it to the city, to Leipzig, to make it into good material. So too, yes, the Baal Shem Tov and the Mizrach Maggid introduced this great material, but who made it into what it needs to be? That it was sent to Lubavitch, the Rebbe's of Lubavitch. They took the teachings of Baal Shem Tov and they made it to what it needs to be. Reb Pinchas got very angry, and he took a bottle from the table, he threw it at Rashbatz, and the first bottle hit his forehead and he ignored it. The second bottle hit his arm, and his whole life he was suffering in his arm because of the pain that he had from that bottle hitting his arm. It's hard for us to understand the kind of how much they cared about their path in serving Hashem, and that this is what irked their ire. But either way, Rashbatz fainted. So it seems that Rashbatz was warned, don't mess with this guy, and he ignored it. And it seems, again, this was a mistake. So why does Rashbatz say that he didn't make any mistakes? The first story, he made a mistake, he looked at the paper. And the second story, he made a mistake, and he answered Reb Pinchas with a remark that was sure to irk his ire. So we need to remember that Rashbatz was on a very high level spiritually. And we can't say that he just opened the letter because he was curious. Or he had to respond to this Penina, this Pinchas, because he couldn't hold himself in. We have to say something deeper over here. All mistakes in our world come from the world of chaos, the world of Tayuch. Chassidus talks about how in the world of chaos, there are more lights, there are a lot of lights, but the vessels can contain the lights. The lights are such great intensity, but the vessels can't hold the lights. A person needs to similarly adopt a stance that fits in with his surroundings. He can't just like do his thing and ignore what's going on in the world. He needs to figure out what can fit in this vessel. So perhaps we could say that the Rashbatz was trying to connect to lights that were beyond his vessels. He wasn't interested in reading the paper because of curiosity. He wanted to get the deeper secrets that were there. He wanted to connect to it. So this was a mistake that came from a very deep desire to be closer to Hashem, similar to what the Torah says about Nadav and Avihu, that they passed away because of their yearning to be close to Hashem to the point that their souls left their bodies. And similarly, in the second story, it's not that he couldn't hold himself in, but he was connected to his experience as a Chabad Chassid, and he wasn't going to not express it despite the danger that he might experience. But this is what the Rashbatz meant when he said his mistake was that he wasn't so aware of his virtues. Chassidus says that although the world of chaos has intense light, but it's external, it's not the essence. Rashbatz was saying, I guess I connected to great lights, but I wasn't connected in the appropriate way to who I really was and what I'm really meant to be. Yes, he shot for big things. Chassidus says that the plain paper, the whiteness of paper, is connected also to the infinite light of Hashem. Yeah, he's connected to infinite light. That's great, but that's not the essence. The essence has to do with the will of Hashem and making the world a home for Hashem, like a vessel for Hashem's light in the physical world. So yes, it's nice to have an experience and express your experience, but does it fit? Is that God's plan? And so how do you be more connected to the essence of godliness, not the external light of Hashem, not the intense light of the world of chaos, but to the essence of godliness, what Hashem wants of him, then he would have aligned himself better with his surroundings. He wouldn't have looked in the letter and he wouldn't have responded to Pinchas. Tonight I was speaking to Rabbi Shimonov from Queens. Rabbi Shimonov was the Rebbe's emissary in Samarkand for many years. And he told me that at one point in 1987, 88, the community needed a mikveh in Samarkand. And this was still in deep communistic times. It wasn't as bad as it was in time of Stalin, but it was very problematic to make a mikveh. And he went to the Rebbe, he traveled special to the Rebbe and asked the Rebbe for a blessing to build a mikveh. And the Rebbe said, Chaim, he went to the Rebbe by dollars. The Rebbe gave dollars every Sunday. And the Rebbe gave him $1 and blessed him to build a mikveh. Okay. So he goes back to Samarkand. And he goes back to the synagogue. And the synagogue is like, we don't want a mikveh here. We don't want it. So he goes to his mother's house. And he calls up Rabbi Yonah Prus, who was connected to the Rebbe's, who was going to deliver a message to the Rebbe. The message he had for the Rebbe is, the Rebbe gave me a blessing to build a mikveh. They don't want it. So the Rebbe's response was, where are you right now? And I'm calling from my mother's house. So the Rebbe said, so build a mikveh right there, right now. Start. So he went out into the courtyard, got some friends, they started digging. They didn't really know how to dig, but they started digging. The Rebbe said to dig right now. They went to dig right now. And the next day they hired some workers and they continued to work to dig and to try to build this mikveh. It was very difficult, he said. They had I'm not sure exactly what he meant. He said that it was very hard to get building materials. He used the Hebrew word avanim, which means stones. And he said something about that week specifically, they made some kind of new ordinance in Russia that if you're already elderly and you're on pension, then you have a right to get these kind of stones that they needed to build. It was an impossible project, but divine providence, they got some materials, they started to build, but then the KGB came. And the KGB says, what are you guys doing here? He says, oh, we're building a bathhouse. The KGB guy says, I know what you're building. You're building a mikveh. He said, well, I didn't know if you knew what a mikveh was, but yes, it is a mikveh. So the KGB says to this Rabbi Shimonov, so you can't build a mikveh. That's illegal. Unless you want to use it just for yourself, you sign here just using it for yourself, then you could build it. He says, no, I can't say it just for me. Oh, you see, it's for everyone. You're building a mikveh. He says, no, 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 no. If someone's dirty and they need want to go in the shower, I'm going to tell them they can't use it. I don't want to sign. I'm never going to let anyone come in. Went back and forth. The KGB agent is like, listen, sir, this is not legal. He says it's not legal. So show me the law. He says, sir, this is not legal. We're shutting this down. It's very difficult. And he told the KGB officer, listen, you want Jews to be here, right? He says, of course. So Jews will not be here without a mikveh. A mikveh is the foundation of a Jewish family. We can't have a families without a mikveh. Back and forth. The final answer of the KGB was, no, you cannot do this. He went back, called Rabbi Prus, and he asked Rabbi Prus, why is it so hard? Please ask that why is it so hard? We trusted, we believed, we wanted to do this. And as the Rebbe said to do it, why aren't we being successful? What's wrong? And if I understood Rabbi Shimon correctly, the Rebbe said, now that you've started, you'll be successful. The blessing needs to have a vessel to be manifest in. Now that you've started, you'll be successful. Keep on going, keep on building. And they ignored the KGB, and they kept on building until today. There is that same mikveh in Samarkand that they built is still there today. A Jew goes with full faith in the tzaddik, and connects to the essence of godliness, to the purpose of why he's here. That's infinite. It lasts forever. As the Shpol Zayda, his heart was warmed forever. Baal Shem touching his heart, it lasts forever. So on a similar note, I'll tell you one more story about Benny Cohen. This story was printed in the Hair magazine. Benny Cohen lives in Brooklyn, and he says that 10 years ago, he had a marketing company, which he still runs, and his marketing company landed a 6-month project with his cell phone company. And in order to fulfill this contract, he needed to hire 30 marketing professionals. And they worked together. And after 6 months, the company decided they don't want to renew the contract. So he let the 30 professionals that he hired know that they're not continuing and we don't need your services anymore. But these 30 people he hired sued him for tens of millions of dollars. They said, listen, you hired us and you're discriminating against us. The reason why you're not continuing the contract is not because the cell phone company canceled, it's because you don't want us to work for you because you're discriminatory, because you are against who we are, you're discriminating, and they're suing him for tens of millions of dollars. So there was actually no truth at all to that statement, and it was very standard in his business for contracts to get canceled and for workers to be laid off because of the similar circumstances, and he was really surprised. But he asked a bunch of friends what to do. And he approached one friend of his who was a businessman who had a similar situation. And the guy says to him, Benny, you have to settle with them. Once they start with you, you'll never hear the end of it. Make a settlement. Oh, thank you. So, although he appreciated his honesty, but he knew that he couldn't do it because if he settled with them, instead of paying tens of millions of dollars, paying $5 million, it would end his company. So what should he do? So one day after morning prayers, another wealthy businessman comes over to him and he says to him, Benny, I heard you speaking about your lawsuit. Do you have any time tomorrow? I want to take you somewhere. He says, okay, sure, let's go. Next day after Shachas, the guy says to him, come in my car. They go together, doesn't know where he's going. So we're going to the Ohel. They go to the Ohel. He'd never been there before. And he wrote a letter to the Rebbe. And Benny's a Kohen, but in the Ohel, there's they arranged a way for Kohanim to approach right up to the Ohel, and he wrote a letter to the Rebbe, and he asked her for a bracha, and he leaves. 2 weeks later, one of the professionals that he hired, part of the team, suing the company, walked into Benny's office and says, Benny, I've been very uneasy about this lawsuit because you're such a good boss. And I feel terrible about what everyone's doing to you and what we're doing to you. I can't sleep because of it. So Benny asked, so what happened? So this man said, one of the women on our team convinced us to sue you and to tell you and to tell the courts that you are discriminating. And they said that that these lawsuits always gain money. People always are willing to settle for these kind of lawsuits, and it's just worth it. So we all agreed to sue you. And I can't live with this. I know it's not true. I know there's not a shred of truth to this, and therefore I have to recuse myself from this lawsuit. So Benny is thinking, okay, that's 1 out of 30. There's still 29 other people that are suing me. So then the man says, Benny, I recorded all these meetings. I can give you the recordings. He pulled out his phone and started playing snippets of the meetings. You could hear this woman encouraging their colleagues to lie to make money. It works every time, she says. They always settle. So immediately, Benny sent the recordings to his lawyer. And the next court hearing, the lawyer requested a meeting in the judge's chambers, played the recording to the judge. The judge was furious when he discovered the blatant corruption. The case was immediately dropped, and the company survived, Baruch Hashem, with the help of Hashem, after Benny's first visit to the oil. Bottom line is, as it says in Yom Yom, that the seeing a tzaddik, hearing a tzaddik, movement of a tzaddik lasts forever. Tzaddik's words are forever. And as we read in the conclusion of today's portion, Yosef told his brothers, God will remember you and take us out of Egypt. So too, the Rebbe said that Hashem announces every single day, as if he never said it before, I will remember you. I'll take you out of Egypt. I'll take you out of this exile. When we see Hashem's promise to be fulfilled today, see Hashem remembers us and sends Mashiach Tzidkeinu